Hello there, and welcome to Wildcard Decks. And today I'm going to go through a little bit of a report from my planetary qualifier, along with the usual kind of deck profile of the deck that I actually took. And as you can see, I took a Lando Red Tarkin Town, so it does have similarities to the Lando deck I've previously posted on this channel, but it's basically been more focused down and more of an aggro deck than it was previously. So if we go into a bit about my match results themselves, and round one against Han 1 yellow, I was able to win 2-0. Then it kind of went downhill from there. So Palpatine green, I lost 1-2. Han 1 yellow, I lost 1-2. And then Cad Tarkin Town, I lost 0-2. All of those matches were generally actually close. I was able to get a lot of damage onto their base, but Palpatine Green, I remember that command, the double green event, was particularly potent against this deck because they were able to do 3 damage against my units, and I don't have many units that can survive that, and then they also put it into play as a resource. So you need to kill Palpatine very quickly to avoid defeat against that kind of deck. I also had a bit of a brain fart against this deck because they were using Traitorous and I have Confiscate in my sideboard, but I completely negated to put it in. I put Spark of Rebellion in from my sideboard, but yeah, I didn't think about Confiscate whatsoever because yeah, that would have potentially won me the match if I had drawn it, if I'd put it in. But there you go, you live and learn. And then against hand 1 yellow, what did it in for me? I think every game in that set actually, they were able to put a Hotshot Blaster on their Cantina Bouncer and take out Lando in one hit. So whenever Lando is defeated in a phase, and he was at full health for all of those games as well, so I was not expecting necessarily that they would be able to kill him in one hit. So when Lando dies, you can't access his smuggle discount, so it can scupper your plans, and you're only able to play 1 card instead of 2 in a phase. So yeah, it can be quite impactful. They were also able to late game DJ tech combo me. If they do it in the early game, I can usually deal with it, but as we get later on, I would tend to resource clear the field, which is what can counter the tech DJ combo quite easily. But yeah, the later you get onto the game, the less likely they're going to be playing units that cost 3 or less. So it was a combination of those two things that I think did me in that matchup. Cad Tarkin Town, now there are 2 of them, can be difficult to deal with. They were able to pull it off, I think, twice in a row. Well, yeah, both games. Yeah, they definitely pulled it off in both games. When the now there are 2 of them play is the Bosk ambush unit, that's actually okay because what they did was ambush into my unit. It took 2 damage back. I can Tarkin Town it away immediately. What is more problematic is if it's Zuckuss, and I think that's what happened in the first game. Now, an argument can be made that you just not Tarkin Town, that you daring raid and then possibly Tarkin Town away their turn 1 unit, so that they then can't do now there are 2 of them, but that then makes it more likely that they play 1 unit out in the next phase, and then they're closer to being able to do now there are 2 of them and get the Cad Bane unit out instead, which is going to be far worse for you. So it's a difficult matchup if they are doing the now there are 2 of them. I wasn't sure how I would fare against it. Now, another thing that CAD players might do is, if they have the initiative on the first phase, to pass, because they want to be able to ping you. This deck doesn't really care about that, because you are pretty much always going to be playing 2 1-cost units in the first phase, so if they can ping and Tarkin Town 1 away, you will still have 1 unit out. So in other decks, you might want to then just take the initiative instead, so that you're on the next phase, you've got more resources, so do they as well, but because we're playing Lando, all of our cards are cheap. The more resources your opponent has, the harder it's going to be for you to win. So you want to be able to get the game done relatively early if possible. So yeah, taking the initiative to avoid a ping is not going to be advantageous at all. I then went against two Quinlans that were Tarkintown, which I won 2-0. I felt quite confident that this deck would be strong against Quinlan, and again that is because phase 1 we'll be playing 1-cost units. Pretty much every Quinlan deck that I've seen does not play any 1-cost units whatsoever, so they are not going to be able to ping you and Tarkintown you away straight away. Similarly, phase 2 you might play a 2-cost unit and then a 1-cost upgrade or event or another 1-cost unit. So again, they're not going to be able to ping you, and it just kind of continues that way. And I think in some of the games they didn't ping me until Quinlan and Leader himself was out, which is when the cost requirement is much easier to match, to pull off. And then Darth Vader Green is kind of similar to Palpatine. Deal with their Sentinels early, go aggro, and beat them before Vader comes out. In the second game, they did manage to get Vader out, but I think by that point I'd already managed to get 24 damage onto their base. So yeah, it was very much a rush job against this deck, because the 2 damage ping from Vader's on attack ability would eat through my units quite quickly. So yeah, but I was a bit disappointed that I didn't come up against any Sabine greens, because I feel this deck is very well positioned against that. It can actually outrace Sabine in probably the perfect circumstances, but it also has cards that will disrupt and slow Sabine down so that you can take them out with, I don't want to say with relative ease, but I think this deck is very strong against Sabine. So that was perhaps a little unfortunate. I didn't come against any real control decks, I guess, apart from Emperor Palpatine Green, which is why I had Keep Fighting in, but we'll get into the deck proper, and I've made a few notes at the end as to what changes I would probably make if I were to go to another one with this deck template, I guess you could call it. So in terms of the numbers, we've got 21 ground units and 12 in space. We've got 6 upgrades split between 2 different card types. And then I think it's 11 events off the top of my head. Might be 12, can't remember. Resource cost, as you can see, we're playing Lando. Everything is dirt cheap, so we've got tons of 1 and 2 resource plays. A decent number of 3s as well, but yeah, nothing above that cost, because trying to remember, I think at the tournament, the most resources I had at any one point was 6, and that was because I didn't really draw many smuggle cards. But yeah, throughout the tournament, I was pretty much hovering at 3 and 4 resources, sometimes 5, but yeah, so it kind of becomes a bit irrelevant to have 4-cost plays. And I did play a version of the deck with some 4-cost plays in, but I ended up resourcing them most of the time. So yeah, it might be that I need to figure out a different way of playing Lando so that I do actually play the 4 resource plays, but that's something for another time. In terms of rarity, so there is 3 legendaries in here. It's a tournament, so I was going to take it as seriously as I could with this kind of deck. And then the special cards are Leia from set 1 and R2-D2 from set 1. So, as a reminder of what Lando does, in my previous Lando deck video, I went through the sequencing of how you want to play the smuggle ability. I won't go through that in the same detail here, so you can check out the previous video if you want a bit more info on that. But Lando, as a leader, what does he do? So his frontside action is play a card using smuggle. It costs 2 less, defeat a resource you own and control. So most smuggle cards, their smuggle cost is basically their base cost plus 2. There are some exceptions, but in short, Lando's ability will basically remove that additional cost. You do have to defeat a resource you own and control, but ideally you will defeat one of the resources that you've just exhausted to then mean you're not essentially paying an extra one. So he deploys on 4 resources, so he's an early leader, which helps with the aggro template of or aim of this deck. So he only has 2 power, which is not great. 5 HP means he is vulnerable to many things. Open fire doesn't quite kill him, but he'll be waiting for a stiff breeze to knock him over. His ability stays the same. One thing you do need to remember is if you do want to deploy Lando, you cannot use his action before doing so because you'll be down to 3 resources. Now, there have been some occasions where I've actually been okay with delaying his deployment by a turn, but that's usually because I've got an opportunity to get a Hotshot Blaster out and some other play as well. So, yeah. But in most cases, you will not use the ability before you've deployed him. And then when he's deployed, the ability doesn't change whatsoever. It doesn't exhaust him either, so it's not a case of either attacking with him or using his ability. You can do both, but you can only use it once each round. And then the base that we're using is Tarkin Town, as are a lot of people. We've got Daring Raid in the deck to be able to easily trigger this. The general strategy of this deck is that you're looking to play 2 cards pretty much every phase. And we've got Daring Raid to help trigger Tarkin Town. We also have Clear the Field to help keep up early unit advantage and make it difficult for your opponent to kind of stabilize in the early game and catch up. And when they get to a point where they have stabilized, you will have other Daring Raids to hopefully finish them off, or the Falcon to come in and attack them in the same phase, Cassian Andor who can do the same, and we've got Reckless Gunslinger that can get in the extra damage as well, just by playing it. So that's kind of the general idea behind the deck. So all of the ground units that do not have smuggle. So R2D2 is only in here because I was looking for another 1 cost unit, and I didn't want to put any units with 1 health in. Reckless Gunslinger is an exception to that, but yeah, he has 4 health, so he's a good target to put on upgrades, on him because he is more likely to be able to survive, and helps to filter your next plays as well, which can be useful. And there was one game where I think I got 2 uses out of it and put them to the bottom, which helped me get to my next Daring Raid, which won me the game. So it does have a use. And then our next 1 resource ground unit is Soldier of the 501st, so a new card from set 3, which wouldn't have been in my previous deck because it did not exist. So it attacks for 2 because of raid, and it's got 3 health, so it doesn't die to everything, at least, and that's one reason why I've got it in there. We've got 3 of Leia Organa because while she's a 2 resource unit, when played you can either ready a resource or exhaust a unit. And in most instances for the first phase, you're going to want to play 2 units. Having Leia here with a ready resource option, it pretty much guarantees you're going to be able to do that. So you'll have to have a pretty unlucky draw to not be able to. I think with her included as a turn 1, like 1 cost unit, I think like a third of a deck, give or take, is 1 cost for the first phase. So yeah, that's generally what you're looking to do. We've got Sabine Wren, so I've only gone for 2 of her because she's unique, but because we've got a lot of cheap units and the fact that Lando himself is yellow hero, it's surprisingly often that you would trigger the 3 aspects part of this card, which doesn't usually come up, but if you've got Lando out and let's say Soldier of 501st, which is entirely possible, then you've got 3 different aspects, which mean that Sabine can't be attacked, so she can then be a target that you want to put Arm to the Teeth on, Hotshot Blaster, so she'll have extra attack, but she can't be killed until someone, well, by unit damage anyway, I should say, unit combat, until they've taken out some of the other units. On attack, she can deal 1 damage to the defender or to a base. One of the reasons I have her in here was for Village Protectors. Now, of course, I didn't come up against any Village Protectors in my tournament. In fact, I didn't come up against any blue decks, I don't think. So, yeah, anyway. Our final non-smuggleable unit is Rogue Operative. So, again, this was to help deal with Sentinels because they would slow me down. So, It has Ray 2, so it actually hits for 4, and it's got Saboteur, so it doesn't care about Sentinels, and likewise, if there's Village Protectors, it would be able to kill that in one hit and survive as well. So that was the main reason for them being in there. So onto the ground units that do have Smuggle. So we've got Reckless Gunslinger, so it costs 1 normally, but with Smuggle it costs 3, but if you use Lando's discount, it will only cost 1, so it's very playable at all stages of the game, really. It deals 1 damage to each base. I think I did get 2 game wins by playing this and getting that last bit of damage in, so that is primarily what it's in there for. Next one is L3. I've got just for 2 of those. You could make a case for 3 or add in a crafty smuggler in as an option. But when played, you can rescue a captured card. That isn't really going to come up that much, although Cad Bane unit has become quite popular. So it might actually come up, but that'll be a later gameplay. And if you don't rescue a card, then you get a shield token. So it's a crafty smuggler, basically. Smuggle cost is 4. With Lando, that can be 2. So again, you're playing it for its normal cost. Cassian Andor costs 3, 5. Smuggle cost is 5, but with Lando's discount, it's only 3, so his normal cost again. And when it's played using Smuggle, ready this unit. So in this game, pretty much any unit that can deploy and attack in the same phase is always going to be extremely useful. And it's good against control, because if they've used, I don't know, takedown to take out a unit, then you can deploy a unit and still attack in the same phase. So it's always useful for that sort of thing. Tech, I only went with 2 of him, because I think 3 is probably excessive, and we'll get onto it a bit later, but I would probably swap him out in it completely. I don't think I didn't feel like I had a massive benefit from him being in the deck. I might have been able to smuggle out 1 or 2 cards that don't have smuggle, because that's what he provides. But yeah, I think there would be other choices that I would prefer to have in. So anyway, ignoring all that, he's one of the few smuggle cards that actually is cheaper with Lando's ability when you smuggle him. Because when you smuggle him in, he's only, well, with Lando's ability, he's only a 2, so 1 less than his actual deploy. But every card gains smuggle. One thing to bear in mind as well, it's just dawned on me and remembered that the Palpatine player that I played against, they sideboarded in the Scanning Officer. Now, Scanning Officer basically defeats this deck single-handedly, pretty much. So if you saw it in a game, then you might be thinking differently about what you resource, because every card that has smuggle, if they reveal it, it gets defeated. The new resources come in exhausted, so you've lost plays that you could make, if not all of them. Now, Poggle the Lesser was one of the best cards for Lando, because that's pretty much replaced Scanning Officer as the early official card of choice. But unfortunately for me, that Emperor Palpatine player sideboarded the Scanning Officer in, and they did hit 1 or 2 resources off me at one point, and that did do some damage to me. So why was I mentioning that now? Because with tech, all of your resources gain smuggle, so if they play a Scanning Officer, they will be able to defeat 3 of your resources. So something to bear in mind. So yeah, there's other reasons why I think I would replace tech, but onto space, and there are no smuggleable units in space that I've put in this deck anyway. So this is the entirety of our Space Force. So to add to the turn 1 potential plays, we've got Cartel Turncoat, so ideally you'll have 1 unit in the ground and 1 unit in space. It does have a bounty of draw a card, but that's not too bad, all things considered. I've gone for 1 of Anakin's Interceptor because I wanted another space unit, and it was going to be this or the Y-Wing. I thought that this would be better as an aggro option, because if your base has 15 or more damage, then it gets +2 attack. So it's actually hitting for 4, which for only 2 resources is pretty good. I've only gone for 1 because I don't want to take away from the A-Wing numbers, because that's the main damage dealer that we have in space for this deck. Speaking of, A-Wing, I'm sure you all know, staple of red hero decks. Attacks for 3, just very useful. And now that I think about it, there is a potential mega combo of damage that you can do involving the A-Wing. So a few spoilers for my cards that I'll reveal later on, but if you're able to get armed to the teeth on the A-Wing, it gives it an extra 2 power. So it hits for 5. With Keep Fighting readies any unit. It readies a unit that has 3 power or less. So this still only has 3 power with Armed to the Teeth on it. Hits for another 5, so it's done 10 damage in total. Armed to the Teeth also gives +2 to a friendly unit for that phase. So you've given +4 attack to another unit. So this would typically, you'd be probably doing this when you've deployed Lando Leader, because that's when it's most possible and easiest to pull off. Lando gets +4 attack. He then hits for 6, so you can do 16 damage in one phase, and that's where I would say if you pull that off against Sabine, you are definitely going to be outracing her. So yeah, that is one of the reasons I had to Keep Fighting in as well, but we'll get onto the notes later, but I would swap Keep Fighting out because I didn't really get into a spot where it became useful, or reliable. So anyway, on to the next units. I'm getting sidetracked. Red 3, again, we've got a lot of heroism units. In fact, who isn't heroism? Reckless Gunslinger isn't. And that is it. So yeah, we only have one unit in the deck that isn't heroism, so everyone else will benefit from Red 3's Raid 1 gifting ability. Got 2 of them, and then the Millennium Falcon, which I was able to kindly borrow, because I have none myself for the tournament. So this one requires a bit of forethought as well, because if you want to keep it out after it's been deployed in later phases, then you have to pay 1 or it returns to your hand. Now, as generally we want to play 2 cards every phase, if you're paying 1 to keep this out, that might stop you from doing so. So it can be beneficial to actually return it to hand, and then it also means you do have the option later on, if you a few damage away, you need to get some in, deploy it again, and it's going to be able to attack in the same phase. So another thing that you can do with it is if you have already got it out and you've attacked in, and your opponent, well, actually, even if your opponent just ignores it because it's exhausted, I think, yeah, I'll just deal with everything else or put damage onto your base. If you have another copy in hand, then you can play it again, defeat the old one that's just attacked, and then the new one will come in ready. So you've been able to push in 6 damage with kind of 1 unit. So yeah, that's something that you can do with it. And that is the legendary of the deck. And I don't think it's a cheap one. I think it's going for like 20, 30 quid, give or take. So yeah, it's not one that I've picked up naturally, unfortunately. Onto the events, minus the wildcard, which I will highlight afterwards. So we've got 3 daring raids because we want to be able to have a choice of activating Tarkin Town with relative ease if we want to, or we can choose it to get us over the line onto base. We've got Clear the Field, which is basically a conditional waylay, and this helps us to continue this general strategy of playing 2 cards a phase, because phase 1 you'll play 2 units in most instances. Phase 2 you could do Clear the Field to return one of their units to hand, and then play a 1-cost unit as well yourself, so you'll have potentially 3 units out and they may only have 1. So you're in a very good position there. One thing you do have to be mindful of is that it works for both players. So if you've played an A-Wing and they've played an A-Wing, if you use Clear the Field on their A-Wing, it will also bounce your own A-Wing back to your hand. So something to bear in mind. This Clear the Field is particularly good against the Han Yellow DJ Tech combo, because if they play Tech for 3 or however many resources they've used, you can choose Clear the Field to send it straight back to their hand, so it will at least delay the DJ Tech combo for another phase. Similarly, if you, for whatever reason, choose not to use clear the field on tech, you can use clear the field on DJ, which will then put your give your resource back to you. So yeah, it's very good for that. The other reason that I've chosen to go all in on clear the field is because a lot of Sentinels are 3 cost or less. Now, I did encounter the Chewbacca Sentinel, and that was a very big problem for me to deal with, but I was able to get it over the line. But yeah, it's to they may well identify that you're the aggro deck. They think, okay, I need to play an early Sentinel. You can get rid of it quite easily via either Daring Raid and Tarkin Town or clear the field to send it back to hand. And then if they play it again the next phase, yeah, you still may well be able to deal with it quite easily. So that's the main reason for that. And then keep fighting. This is one of the ones I would swap out because it's just not quick enough. Apart from with the A-wing combo that I mentioned, which I was extremely close to pulling off in the tournament, but I can't remember what happened, but it prevented me from doing so. But yeah, my main reason for going over for using keep fighting rather than something like surprise strike was because I was thinking about control. So being able to deploy a unit for 2 and then readying it and attacking in the same phase can be quite powerful. So that was my main thinking behind that. Onto the wild card. So these are the cards that I feel are perhaps not being played or being overlooked or just thought of as being a bit rubbish. Now, Asteroid Sanctuary, it's set 1 card, but I think has been somewhat forgotten. I might have used it a handful of times before, and this was actually quite a late addition into the deck, because basically I just looked at all the cards that I hadn't put in the deck that would be plausible, and then I came across this and I thought, actually, yes, this is probably essential. It wasn't even in the sideboard initially, but what does it do? So exhaust an enemy unit, and then you give a shield token to a friendly unit that costs 3 or less. Now, if you remember, we don't have any cards in this deck that cost more than 3 resources, so you will, unless you've only got Lando deployed, you will always have a target to give a shield unit to. The other extremely good thing about this card is that it says exhaust an enemy unit, not an enemy non-leader unit. So as most leaders are more powerful than Lando in general terms, being able to exhaust their leader helps to kind of equalize things for you, whilst also giving some protection to one of your own units. So just trying to think with Asteroid Sanctuary, did I use it on anything but leaders in the tournament? I don't think I did. But yeah, any kind of unit that has an on attack ability as well, you can use it on that. So I mean, Enfys Nest is just a nightmare for this deck. The set 3 Enfys Nest, I should say. So being able to exhaust her could be useful, but I think if she's out, you're probably going to lose with this deck anyway. So onto the upgrades. So I've got 6 of them. So Hotshot Blaster is essential for this deck because it's a 1 cost when played normally. Smuggle is 3, but with Lando's ability, it's only a 1, so you're able to get a +2 boost and hit immediately. So it's action efficient, which is always useful. And yeah, it just helps push the damage in. Armed to the teeth. So if you pull this off with 2 ready units in a phase, then you've got extra 4 damage, because it gives +2 attack, but also +2 attack to another friendly unit when that unit is attacked. So 4 extra damage from 1 upgrade that only costs 2. Its smuggle cost is 4, which is not what you're going to be paying. You will be targeting this as a Lando ability, so that it only costs 2. One of the plays that you'll want to try and pull off with this deck is a double arm to the teeth. So this will be, you'll be trying to pull this off when when Lando is deployed, because you'll be on 4 resources at that point. So in the very early game, if you've already resourced an arm to the teeth, and you draw another one before or when you're about to deploy Lando, then you'll keep one of them in your hand because you'll play that one as normal, which costs 2. You'll smuggle in with the discount for 2. Probably put both of them on Lando. I don't like to always Voltron my units up because they just become a massive target, but Lando is a bit less vulnerable than the other ones, so yeah, he's probably the best bet. He hits for 6, you give +4 to something else, you're probably hitting for another 6 minimum. So yeah, one of the best ways to push damage quickly and suddenly in this deck is Arm to the Teeth. So I know usually include a sideboard with these videos, but as it was a tournament, I did take one and I did make use of it. So if I go through my thinking on why I've included each of them. So Confiscate, I was torn between this and Disabling Fang Fighter, but I leaned on the side of this because it's only a 1 cost and it will perform the function that I'm mostly looking for. So I was more worried about things like Perilous Position and Frozen in Carbonite. And of course, I didn't encounter any of those. As I mentioned earlier, against the Emperor Palpatine player, I should have sideboarded it in, but for whatever reason, my mind did not think about it, because that would have been able to take out the traitresses, assuming I drew them, of course. But yeah, that may well have been able to win me that match, but never mind. Disarm, so I had these in to help counter any aggro decks. So I would have sideboarded this in against Sabine, most probably, if I'd actually gone against a Sabine. I also have it as a counter to any Anakin decks, because if he is particularly, well, the best way to beat an Anakin deck with this deck is to kill it before Anakin deploys. If you aren't quite able to do that, then you are able to at least neuter Anakin with -4. So he might be half as powerful as he would be otherwise, and he's not going to be able to do the bravado combo to anywhere near the same effect. So that was primarily the main reasons that Disarm were in the sideboard. Breaking in was mainly if I decided I needed to be more aggro than the deck allows in its main state. Only gone for 2 of them because I feel like with Arm to the Teeth as well, I already have some very good damage pushing options. I opted for Breaking In rather than Surprise Strike because I wanted Saboteur, because I don't want to be scuppered by a Sentinel. And then Spark of Rebellion. This is going to be mainly for the control and those that are looking to ramp, etc. So, or if I was against any green villainy, then ideally I would play this on 4 resources, so that if they have an overwhelming barrage waiting in the winds, because that would just wreck me, I'd be able to get rid of that. I think I only ended up using it once, but I think I only drew it once. So, but one time I did use it, I got rid of a Darth Vader. So I mean that was fairly satisfying. I still lost that game anyway. But yeah, so that was the main thinking between this set of 10 cards to swap in and out. So I've kind of hinted on some of the changes that I would make if I was to do it again, basically. As I say, I think I would remove tech because we already have a lot of smuggle cards as it is anyway. Yes, it's good to make use of a discount as well combined with that, but tech just becomes a massive target. I think in pretty much maybe every game apart from one, he just died straight away because they just knew that, well, he's clearly got something he wants to play, and it's probably a daring raid. Spoiler, it was. So yeah, I'm not sure that tech has a place in the deck. I think I would probably be looking at replacing him with the set 3 Sabine Wren, because if you're looking to get that last bit of damage in, then when you deploy Sabine, she comes in exhausted. She can't be attacked when she's exhausted, so you might be forcing your opponent to, well, you might be putting them in an impossible situation because they may need to take the initiative, so that then you can't attack with Sabine for 4 straight away. But if they take the initiative and you already have other units in play that can get that final damage in, then yeah, just by deploying her by itself, you may have actually managed to win the game. So that's something that I'm considering. And then of course K2SO, because again it's kind of similar function to Sabine really, but if they need to kill K2SO, they're going to take 3 damage. So yeah, it's just 3 damage into their base. Another one would be Set 2 Falcon, because that's a 5/5 in space, which is quite hard to deal with. The thing to note with that as well is that its smuggle cost is 6, so that is actually the same as its normal deploy. So with Lando's ability, you can actually play it out for 4 resources. So a space unit at 4 resources that's 5/5 stats is extremely good and hard to deal with. So yeah, I think there might be a place for that as well somewhere. But yeah, I would need to learn to play the deck a bit differently because, as I say, I've tended to always resource my 4 play resources when I've tried it before. So the other changes I would make would be to remove Keep Fighting and put in Surprise Strike or Breaking In, because it in the tournament I needed the immediacy. Keep Fighting, I might have used it once in the whole thing, but when I'd sideboarded Breaking In, pretty much used it every time. So yeah, it's I think the logic behind Keep Fighting, it was sound, but it never came up. So yeah, and I think on the subject of tech, I would probably have Kira in the sideboard. She may well have a place in the main deck, but I think on the kind of aggro side of things, she doesn't fit with that. So I think it would depend how the first game went as to would we then put Kira in, and then you'll also have a better idea of what is in their deck, because her ability is looking at the opponent's hand and you can name something and it'll cost 3 more resources. You don't have to name something that is in their hand, but obviously if you do, that's going to get the immediate value. But if there's something you're more concerned about, that, I don't know, like a takedown, because that kills every single one of our units, then yeah, that might be a better thing to name. So yeah, those are the changes that, bearing in mind I only played this tournament yesterday, so I probably still need a bit more time to reflect on it, but those are kind of my immediate thoughts. So yeah, that's the deck. This video has probably been a bit of a longer one because I had a bit more detail and experiences to go through, but do let me know what you think. Have you been to a PQ yourself, or are you heading off to a PQ? Are you going with a so-called rogue deck? There were actually quite a few rogue decks in this PQ. There was, I'm not sure what colour they were running, but there was a Dr. Aphra. I think there was at least one Jin Urso. There was also a Hera Blue that I heard about. And in fact, the actual winner of the event was a set 1 Han Blue, which I did not have as something to think about. So yeah, there are definitely some players that are still taking these so-called rogue decks along, rather than just 100% so-called meta decks. But yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.